A single gunshot echoed across the vast Montana plains as Eliza Keller desperately ducked behind her broken-down wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. It was 1876, 3 months after she'd left behind everything familiar in Boston to claim the land her late father had purchased sight unseen in the Montana Territory. Now, miles from the nearest settlement with a broken wheel and bandits circling like vultures, she was beginning to think this journey west would be her last. The bullet splintered wood near her head, sending fragments flying. Eliza bit back a scream, clutching her father's old revolver with trembling hands. She had 5 bullets and little idea how to use them effectively. The 3 men who'd been following her since dawn had finally made their move, no doubt assuming a woman alone would be easy prey. "Come on out, pretty lady," called a gruff voice. "We just want to talk about that fine horse you got there, maybe see what else you're carrying." Eliza steadied her breathing, trying to remember what her father had taught her about shooting during their rare hunting trips. The wagon listed dangerously to one side, the broken wheel having given out completely when she'd tried to outrun her pursuers. The supplies she'd so carefully packed were scattered across the dusty ground, her hopes of reaching Butte by nightfall dashed along with them. Another shot cracked the air, closer this time. She had to do something. "I suggest you boys find somewhere else to be," called a deep voice from somewhere to Eliza's right. The unexpected sound made her jump, nearly causing her to drop her weapon. Peering cautiously around the edge of the wagon, she saw a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. The rider had one hand resting casually on his holstered gun, the other holding the reins of a magnificent chestnut stallion. "This ain't your business, mister," one of the bandits shouted. "I'm making it my business." The stranger's voice carried an easy confidence that made Eliza's racing heart skip a beat. "3 men hunting 1 woman doesn't seem sporting to me. Why don't you move along while you still can?" There was a tense silence, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the whistle of wind through the prairie grass. Then, with muttered curses, the bandits retreated. Eliza watched in disbelief as they mounted their horses and galloped away, casting dark glances over their shoulders. When they were dots on the horizon, the stranger dismounted and approached the wagon. As he drew closer, Eliza got her first good look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with laugh lines around eyes the color of a summer sky. Dark blonde hair fell in waves beneath a well-worn hat, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that seemed ready to smile at the slightest provocation. "You can put that down now, madam," he said, nodding toward the revolver still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "I'm not here to cause you any trouble." Eliza lowered the gun slowly but kept it at her side. "Thank you for your assistance, sir, but I had the situation well in hand." The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Of course you did. I just thought I'd save you the ammunition." He removed his hat and bowed slightly. "Jackson Lawson, at your service." "Eliza Keller," she replied, finally setting the revolver down on the wagon seat. "I appreciate your timely intervention, Mr. Lawson, though I'm not in the habit of requiring rescue." "No offense meant, Miss Keller." He circled the wagon, assessing the damage with a practiced eye. "Looks like you've got a broken wheel pin and a cracked spoke, heading to Butte." She nodded, brushing a strand of copper hair from her face. "My father purchased land there before he passed. I'm going to claim it." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Alone? I don't see anyone else here," Eliza replied crisply, though she immediately regretted her tone. This man had just saved her life after all. "I apologize, Mr. Lawson. It's been a trying day." "I'd say so." He knelt by the broken wheel, running his fingers over the damaged wood. "I can fix this if you'll allow it. Got some tools on my horse that should do the trick." Eliza hesitated, years of proper Boston upbringing warning her against accepting help from strange men. But the sun was sinking toward the horizon, and the thought of spending the night alone on the open prairie with those bandits possibly returning was far from appealing. "That would be most kind," she finally said, Jackson nodded and returned to his horse, retrieving a leather tool roll from his saddlebag. As he worked on the wheel, Eliza gathered her scattered belongings, keeping a wary eye on both her benefactor and the horizon. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Lawson?" she asked, hoping to learn more about the mysterious cowboy. "Just passing through," he replied, focused on his task. "Been working cattle drives the last few years, but I'm heading back to my brother's ranch near Butte. He could use the extra hands." He looked up at her with those striking blue eyes. "And you can call me Jack. Mr. Lawson was my father." "Very well, Jack." The name felt strangely intimate on her lips. "You know Butte well then, born and raised near there. It's growing fast since the mining operations expanded." He hammered a pin into place. "Your father's land, do you know where exactly it is?" Eliza reached into her pocket and produced a folded document. "According to this, it's about 10 miles northwest of town, along Silver Creek." Jack paused, his expression unreadable. "The old Wilson place." "You know it. I know every inch of land around Butte." He resumed his work on the wheel. "It's good land, but it's been abandoned for some time. The cabin might need work." Eliza felt her spirits sink. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing confirmation that more challenges awaited did nothing to buoy her confidence. Still, she straightened her shoulders. She hadn't come all this way to falter now. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Lawson, Jack. My father raised me to be resourceful." He glanced up at her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss Keller, but Montana winters are harsh and that land needs more than one pair of hands to work it properly." "Then I shall hire help," she said firmly, though her dwindling funds made such a prospect unlikely. "Or learn to manage with what I have." Jack didn't respond immediately, concentrating instead on reattaching the wheel to the axle. When he finally spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "The wheel should hold until you reach town, but you'll want to have a proper wheelwright look at it before you head out to your property." He stood, brushing dust from his hands and knees. The setting sun cast his features in golden light, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the kindness in his eyes. Something stirred in Eliza's chest that had nothing to do with fear or uncertainty. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "Something resourceful, I imagine," he replied with that hint of a smile. He hesitated, then extended his hand to her. "It'll be dark soon. Butte is still a good 3 hours away by wagon. My brother's ranch is closer, just over that ridge. You'd be welcome to stay the night there and continue your journey in the morning." Eliza looked at his outstretched hand, then at the darkening sky. Wisdom dictated she decline, maintain her independence, and press on. But exhaustion weighed on her like a physical thing, and the thought of facing potential danger again without rest was daunting. She placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, warm and unexpectedly gentle as it closed around her fingers. A curious sensation traveled up her arm at the contact. "I accept your offer, Jack. Thank you." His smile broadened, transforming his face and causing Eliza's heart to skip another beat. "Let's get you situated then, Miss Keller. I promise you'll be safe at the Double L." As Jack helped her onto the wagon seat and secured his horse to the back, Eliza couldn't help but wonder if this chance encounter was merely good fortune or something more. Either way, as they set off toward the distant ridge, with the last rays of sunlight painting the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, she felt for the first time since leaving Boston that perhaps her father's dream wouldn't be impossible after all. Jack guided the wagon with confident hands, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the territory. His deep voice was soothing, and despite her earlier fear, Eliza found herself relaxing in his company. "That's Big Sky Mountain," he said, nodding toward a distant peak. "Local legend says a Crow chief is buried at the summit. They believe his spirit watches over the valley." "It's beautiful," Eliza murmured, taking in the majesty of the landscape. Despite the hardships of the journey, she couldn't deny the raw splendor of Montana territory. "So different from Boston." "I imagine it is." Jack glanced at her curiously. "What made you leave, if you don't mind my asking?" Eliza was quiet for a moment, collecting her thoughts. My father was a dreamer. He always spoke of the West, of open spaces and new beginnings. After the war, his health was never the same, but he saved everything he had to purchase this land. She smoothed her skirt with one hand. He died before he could see it. I'm here to fulfill his dream and perhaps find my own. Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. Many come west for a fresh start. Some find it, some don't. The land doesn't care about your past, only what you're willing to give to it now. And what about you? Eliza asked. Have you always been here, born here, but I've roamed plenty? Drove cattle from Texas to Montana, worked ranches in Colorado, even tried my hand at prospecting in California. A shadow crossed his face. After the war, I needed to keep moving, only recently felt the pull to come back home. Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Eliza didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their private burdens. As twilight deepened into night, a cluster of lights appeared ahead. Jack pointed with his chin. That's the Double L. Lawson Land Ranch. My brother James runs it now since our parents passed. The wagon crested a gentle slope, revealing a sprawling ranch nestled in a valley. A large main house was flanked by several outbuildings, a corral, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, and lanterns glowed in the windows, creating an inviting tableau. As they approached, a dog began to bark, alerting the household to their arrival. The front door opened, spilling golden light onto the porch, and a tall figure stepped out. Jack called a voice. That you? It's me, James, Jack called back, and I've brought a guest. James Lawson strode down from the porch to meet them. He resembled his brother, though his hair was darker and he lacked Jack's easy smile. His expression was guarded as he took in the sight of Eliza. Miss Eliza Keller, Jack introduced her. Heading to her property near Silver Creek, had some trouble with her wagon, so I offered her our hospitality for the night. James's face softened slightly. Any friend of Jack's is welcome here, Miss Keller. He offered his hand to help her down from the wagon. My wife Emma will be glad for the female company. We don't get many visitors, especially not ladies from back east. You're very kind, Mr. Lawson, Eliza said, accepting his assistance. Her legs were stiff from the long journey, and she wobbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Jack was at her side instantly, his hand at her elbow to steady her. The warmth of his touch lingered even after he released her. Let's get you inside, he said. You must be exhausted. The interior of the Lawson home was comfortable and welcoming, with handcrafted furniture and colorful quilts adding warmth to the rustic space. Emma Lawson, a petite woman with kind eyes and a ready smile, greeted Eliza like a long-lost friend rather than a stranger. You poor thing, she said, taking Eliza's hands in hers. You must be famished. Come, sit by the fire while I heat up some stew. Eliza found herself ushered to a chair near the hearth, a cup of hot tea pressed into her hands and a soft blanket tucked around her shoulders. The simple kindness nearly brought tears to her eyes. It had been months since anyone had shown her such care. Jack and James stepped outside to tend to the horses and wagon, leaving Eliza alone with Emma and the Lawsons' two children, 10-year-old Sarah and 7-year-old William, who regarded her with undisguised curiosity. Are you a princess? William asked, his eyes wide. Eliza laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. No, just a very tired traveler. You talk fancy like in stories, Sarah observed, and your dress is pretty even if it's dirty. Sarah, Emma scolded gently. Mind your manners, it's quite all right, Eliza assured her. My dress has seen better days, I'm afraid. The journey west isn't kind to fine fabrics. Emma nodded in understanding. When James and I came out here after we married, I had to learn a whole new way of living. Boston fashions don't hold up to ranch life. You're from Boston as well. Eliza asked, surprised. Worcester actually, but close enough. Met James when he came east to sell cattle in '68. Emma smiled at the memory. Everyone thought I was mad to follow him back to Montana, but I've never regretted it. The door opened, admitting Jack and James along with a gust of cool night air. Jack's gaze immediately sought Eliza, a small smile playing on his lips when he found her wrapped in the blanket by the fire. Wagons secured and the horses are fed, he announced, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. That wheel will hold to butt, but like I said, you'll want to have it properly repaired before heading out to Silver Creek. Thank you again for your help, Eliza said. I don't know how I can repay your kindness. James waved away her concern. Neighbors help neighbors out here, Miss Keller. It's how we survive. But I'm not your neighbor yet, she pointed out. If you're settling at Silver Creek, you will be, Jack said, accepting a cup of coffee from Emma. The old Wilson place is just a few miles from our north pasture. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: venison stew, cornbread, and preserved peaches. The Lawsons spoke of ranch business, local gossip, and the upcoming harvest festival in Butte. Eliza found herself drawn into their easy conversation, answering questions about Boston and her journey west. You'll need supplies before winter sets in, James said as they finished their meal. The trading post in Butte carries most essentials, but for quality tools, you might want to visit Johnson's Hardware. And you must meet Clara at the general store, Emma added. She knows everyone and everything happening in the county. She can help you find household items. Eliza nodded, grateful for the advice but increasingly aware of the monumental task ahead. The funds her father had left would cover initial supplies, but establishing a working homestead would require more resources than she currently possessed. I was thinking, Jack said, setting down his coffee cup, that I could ride with Miss Keller to her property tomorrow, help her assess what needs doing before winter. He glanced at his brother. If you can spare me for a day or two. James studied his brother for a moment, then nodded. The cattle drive's not for another week. We can manage without you for a couple of days. That's really not necessary, Eliza protested, though part of her was relieved at the offer. I've imposed enough already. It's no imposition, Jack assured her. Like James said, neighbors help neighbors. Besides, I know that land well. I can show you where the best water is, which fields drain properly in spring. Their eyes met across the table, and Eliza felt that curious flutter in her chest again. There was something about Jackson Lawson that both unsettled and reassured her, a contradiction she couldn't quite resolve. Very well, she conceded. I would appreciate the guidance. Later, as Emma showed her to a small but comfortable guest room, Eliza found herself wondering about the cowboy who had come to her rescue. There was depth to him that belied his easygoing manner, hints of past pain in the quiet moments between his smiles. Jack's a good man, Emma said softly, as if reading her thoughts. The war changed him like it did so many. He left here angry and restless, but he's come back kinder, I think, more thoughtful. He saved me today, Eliza admitted. I'm not sure what would have happened if he hadn't come along when he did. Emma patted her hand. Get some rest, dear. Tomorrow will be a big day. Sleep came swiftly, dragging Eliza into dreams filled with vast skies, broken wagons, and a pair of blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee and bacon. Eliza dressed quickly in one of her more practical outfits, a navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist that had weathered the journey reasonably well. She braided her long copper hair and pinned it up, determined to present a capable image despite her inner uncertainty. When she entered the kitchen, Jack was already there, helping Emma with breakfast while the children set the table. He looked up at her entrance, his smile warm and genuine. Morning, Miss Keller. Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks, she admitted. And please call me Eliza. After yesterday's adventures, I think we can dispense with formalities. Something like pleasure flickered in his eyes. Eliza it is, then. Breakfast was a lively affair, with the children peppering Eliza with questions about Boston and her journey west. By the time the meal concluded, the sun was well above the horizon, promising another clear autumn day. I've packed some provisions, Emma said, handing Jack a cloth-wrapped bundle. Enough for today, at least. And I've added tools you might need, James added. Hammer, saw, nails. Basics to start repairs on that cabin. You're all too kind, Eliza said, touched by their generosity. Just passing it forward, James replied. When Emma and I first arrived, neighbors helped us get established. It's the Western way. The wagon had been repaired as promised, the wheel now sturdy enough for the journey ahead. Jack loaded their supplies, then helped Eliza onto the seat with a gentle hand at her waist that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Ready?" he asked, climbing up beside her. She nodded, suddenly too aware of his proximity in the confines of the wagon seat. "As I'll ever be." They set off under a brilliant blue sky, Jack's horse tethered behind the wagon once more. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in golden grass, stands of aspen turning yellow with the season, and distant mountains framing the horizon. Despite her apprehension about what awaited at Silver Creek, Eliza couldn't deny the beauty surrounding them. "Tell me about the Wilson place," she said as they traveled. "You mentioned it's been abandoned." Jack nodded, guiding the horses around a rocky outcropping. "Old Man Wilson was one of the first settlers in this area, came out right after the war. Built a solid cabin, dug a good well, started raising cattle. He did well for a while." "What happened?" A shadow passed over Jack's face. "His wife took sick 3 winters back, consumption. By the time the snow melted enough to get her to a doctor, it was too late." He paused. "Wilson stuck it out another year, then sold to a land agent, must have been your father, and headed back east. No one's lived there since, though the Dawsons from the next valley over have been grazing some cattle on the land by informal agreement." Eliza digested this information. "So I may have neighbors who already view the land as partially theirs." Jack glanced at her with newfound respect. "You catch on quick. The Dawsons are decent folk, but they might not be pleased to see the rightful owner show up. We'll need to tread carefully there." "We?" she echoed, raising an eyebrow, his cheeks colored slightly. "Figure of speech. Your land, your decisions. I'm just here to advise." They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon creating a soothing backdrop. Occasionally, Jack would point out landmarks or share stories about the territory's history, painting a vivid picture of the community Eliza was joining. Around midday, they stopped by a clear stream to rest the horses. Jack spread a blanket on the grass and they shared the lunch. Emma had packed cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples. "May I ask you something personal?" Eliza ventured as they ate. Jack looked up, surprised. "You can ask, can't promise I'll answer." She smiled at his honesty. "Fair enough." "Emma mentioned you left home angry after the war. Why did you come back?" He was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, reflective. "I joined up in '63, barely 18, thought I was invincible, that I'd come home a hero." He stared into the distance. "Instead, I watched friends die in mud and blood for causes that seemed to shift with the wind. Came home in '65 with nightmares I couldn't shake and anger I couldn't place." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. "Couldn't settle, couldn't find peace here with all the memories, so I left, figured moving would outrun the dreams." A rueful smile touched his lips. "It didn't, just meant I had nightmares in different places." "What changed?" Eliza asked softly. "Met an old Union sergeant in Colorado, man named Thomas Jenkins. He'd seen worse than me, lost more. Found him teaching children to read in a mining town." Jack tossed the stone into the stream. Asked him how he found peace. He said, "Son, you don't find peace. You make it day by doing good where you can and accepting you can't change what's done." Jack's blue eyes met hers. "Took me years to understand what he meant. Finally realized home wasn't the problem I was. Decided it was time to stop running and start building something meaningful again." He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry, that's more than you asked for." "No," Eliza said, moved by his candor. "Thank you for sharing that with me." "What about you?" he asked. "What are you running from or toward?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm fulfilling my father's dream." "That's what you're doing," Jack corrected gently. "Not why you're doing it." Eliza looked down at her hands, considering his words. "After Father died, there was little left for me in Boston. My mother passed years ago, and Father's debts consumed most of what we had. My aunt offered to take me in, but the price was marrying her son, my cousin George." She wrinkled her nose. "A thoroughly unpleasant man with wandering hands and the personality of wet wool." Jack chuckled at her description. "This land was all Father left me," she continued. Coming here seemed better than the alternative, even if it meant facing the unknown alone. Brave choice, Jack observed, or foolish, she countered with a small smile. Sometimes they're the same thing. He stood, offering his hand. We should keep moving if we want to reach Silver Creek by afternoon. Back on the road, the landscape gradually changed. They passed through a narrow valley, then climbed a gentle slope covered in pines. At the crest, Jack halted the wagon. There, he said, pointing ahead, Silver Creek Valley. Eliza leaned forward, her breath catching. Below them stretched a picturesque valley, bisected by a winding creek that glinted silver in the sunlight. Rolling meadows gave way to stands of pine and aspen, and nestled against the far hillside stood a cabin with several outbuildings. Even from this distance, she could see that the structures had weathered several seasons of neglect, but they stood solid against the backdrop of trees. It's beautiful, she whispered. Good land, Jack agreed. Wilson chose well. Water year-round from the creek, sheltered from the worst winter winds by that rich, fertile soil in the bottomlands. They continued down into the valley, crossing the creek at a shallow ford. As they drew closer to the cabin, Eliza could better assess its condition. The log structure was sound, though the roof would need work before winter. The barn leaned slightly but appeared serviceable, and a corral stood nearby, its rails weathered but mostly intact. Jack brought the wagon to a stop in what had once been a yard, now overgrown with wild grasses and flowers. For a moment neither spoke, taking in what would be Eliza's new home. Well, Jack finally said, shall we see what we're working with? They explored the property methodically, Jack pointing out both problems and possibilities. The cabin's interior was dusty but surprisingly intact, a table and chairs, a small wood stove, rough-hewn shelves along one wall, and a bed frame in the corner. A stone fireplace dominated one end of the single room. Roof needs patching before the snow flies, Jack observed, pointing to water stains on the ceiling. And that window will need to be reglazed, but the walls are solid and the foundation's good. Outside, they checked the well, still producing clean water, the privy in need of minor repairs, and the barn structurally sound despite its slight lean. A small root cellar built into the hillside would provide storage for winter provisions, and the overgrown garden plot could be reclaimed come spring. As the sun began its westward descent, they sat on the cabin's porch steps, taking in the sweep of land that was now Eliza's. It's overwhelming, she admitted. So much to do before winter, and I'm not sure where to start. Roof first, Jack said practically. Then the stove pipe, it needs cleaning, window glazing after that. The rest can wait till those are secure. He glanced at her. What are your plans for income? The land is good, but you'll need money for supplies. Eliza sighed. Father believed there was potential for cattle given the good water source, but I don't have funds to purchase a herd nor experience managing one. Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking, there's another option. The valley's perfect for horses. Start small, a few brood mares, a good stallion. Horses require less initial investment than cattle, and they're in constant demand with the army, the stage lines, and the ranches. Horses, Eliza repeated thoughtfully. I do know horses. Father raised them outside Boston before the war. It would take time to establish, but it could work. Jack stood, offering his hand to help her up. We should head to the Lawsons before dark. Tomorrow we can go into Butte, get supplies, and I'll help you start on the most urgent repairs. Eliza took his hand but didn't immediately rise. Why are you doing all this, Jack? You barely know me. His expression softened, something warm and unexpected flickering in his eyes. Maybe I'm making peace day by doing good where I can. The journey back to the Double L was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. As the ranch came into view, Eliza found herself reluctant for the day to end. Despite the daunting challenges ahead, for the first time since her father's death, she felt something like hope taking root. That evening, around the Lawsons' dinner table, Jack outlined what they'd found at Silver Creek and the work needed before winter. James and Emma listened attentively, offering suggestions and support. The hardware store in Butte has most of what you'll need, James said. And Hank Miller might have some salvaged window glass that would fit your cabin, I have extra preserves and dried goods I can share, Emma added, at least until you can establish your own stores. That's very generous, Eliza said, but I can't accept charity. Not charity, Emma corrected firmly. An investment in a neighbor, you'll pay it forward when you're established. Later, as Eliza prepared for bed, Emma brought her a bundle of clothing. These might suit your new life better than Boston fashions, she explained, laying out several practical skirts, shirtwaists, and a sturdy jacket. They're a bit worn, but they'll hold up to ranch work. Eliza ran her fingers over the simple, serviceable garments. I don't know how to thank you all. See that homestead thrive, Emma said with a smile. That's thanks enough. The trip to Butte the next day was an education in frontier commerce. The growing mining town was bustling with activity prospectors, cowboys, settlers, and merchants creating a vibrant, if rough, community. Jack guided Eliza through the chaos with a protective hand at her elbow, introducing her to key townsfolk and helping her negotiate for supplies. At Johnson's Hardware, they purchased roofing materials, window glass, nails, and tools. The general store yielded staple foods, lamp oil, and household necessities. By midday, the wagon was loaded with the most essential items, with promises from various merchants to deliver larger orders to Silver Creek in the coming week. One more stop, Jack said, leading her toward a small corral at the edge of town. Horse trader I know. Might have something suitable to start your breeding stock. The trader, a grizzled man named Pete Jenkins, greeted Jack warmly. Lawson, heard you were back in these parts. Come to buy that Appaloosa stallion you've been eyeing. Not today, Pete. Miss Keller here is setting up at the old Wilson place, looking to start a modest horse breeding operation. Pete's shrewd eyes assessed Eliza with new interest. Is that so? Wilson had good grazing land, smart choice for horses. He gestured to the corral. Got a few mares might suit, and a young Morgan stallion with excellent bloodlines. The next hour was spent evaluating horses, with Eliza demonstrating a knowledge of conformation and bloodlines that clearly impressed both men. By the time they concluded their business, she had arranged to purchase 3 mares and the stallion on credit, with delivery set for the following week. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Keller, Pete said as they shook hands. Your father taught you well. He would have approved of your stock, Eliza replied with a smile, especially that bay mare. As they prepared to leave town, Jack steered the wagon past a small church where a cluster of people had gathered. What's happening? Eliza asked. Wedding, Jack explained. Sheriff Thompson's daughter to the blacksmith's son. Been courting for years. They paused to watch as the newly married couple emerged from the church to cheers and well wishes. The bride's radiant smile as she looked up at her husband stirred something wistful in Eliza's heart. For a fleeting moment, she imagined herself in white, with Jack waiting at the altar. The unbidden thought made her cheeks warm. They look happy, she observed, hoping her face didn't betray her thoughts. Most do on their wedding day, Jack replied, a curious note in his voice. The trick is staying that way. He clicked to the horses and they continued on their way. The following days established a pattern. Each morning, Jack would arrive at Silver Creek, having ridden from the Double L at dawn. Together, they would work on the cabin, Jack handling the heavier tasks like roof repair, while Eliza cleaned the interior, reglazed windows, and reclaimed the garden area. In the evenings, he would ride back to his brother's ranch, returning with the sunrise. Progress was steady. The roof was patched before the first autumn rain tested their work. The stove was cleaned and deemed operational, the chimney swept clear of nests and debris. Windows were repaired, the porch stabilized, and the well cleared of years of accumulated leaves and twigs. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, filled Eliza with a sense of ownership and pride. More than the physical improvements, though, she valued Jack's company. His quiet strength and unwavering support became the foundation of her days. They talked as they worked about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. In the spaces between words, something deeper grew, unacknowledged but undeniable. A week after their trip to Butte, Pete Jenkins delivered the horses as promised. The three mares, a bay, a chestnut, and a dapple gray, and the young Morgan stallion transformed the property, bringing life and purpose to the once abandoned homestead. "They're magnificent," Eliza breathed, watching the animals explore their new pasture. "I never thought I'd have this again, horses of my own to raise and train." Jack leaned against the corral fence beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "They suit you, strong, spirited, beautiful." She glanced at him, startled by the unexpected compliment, but he was watching the horses, his profile outlined against the setting sun. The moment stretched between them, filled with words neither quite dared to say. The horses' arrival necessitated repairs to the barn and corral, extending Jack's daily presence at Silver Creek. Though James occasionally teased his brother about his extended absences from the Double L, he made no serious objections. Emma, Eliza noticed, watched the two of them with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself. October brought the first frost, painting the valley in crystalline white each morning until the sun burned it away. The aspen leaves turned golden, then fell in a shower of amber, carpeting the ground around the cabin. Winter's approach lent urgency to their work, but Eliza found herself dreading the completion of the essential repairs for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. One crisp afternoon, as they finished securing the barn doors against winter winds, Jack turned to her with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "I need to join the cattle drive to Miles City next week," he said. "James has been more than patient, but he needs my help getting the herd to market before the heavy snows." Eliza nodded, fighting a wave of disappointment. "Of course, you've already done far more than I had any right to expect." "I'll be gone 2 weeks, maybe 3 if the weather turns," he continued. "Will you be all right here alone?" "I'll manage," she assured him, forcing a smile. "Thanks to you, the cabin is secure, the horses are settled, and I have provisions for the winter. I'll use the time to finish organizing the interior and perhaps start planning the spring garden." Jack studied her face, as if searching for something. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, for he nodded. "Emma will check on you when she can." "And the Dawsons, we spoke with them about your horses grazing alongside their cattle. They're just over the next ridge if you need help." "I'll be fine," Eliza repeated, touched by his concern. "This is what I came west to do, after all, stand on my own." He reached out then, his hand closing gently around hers. "You've done that and more. Your father would be proud." The simple touch, the earnest words, they undid her careful composure. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked rapidly to dispel them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." His fingers tightened around hers. "Eliza, whatever he meant to say was lost as a shout came from the direction of the creek. They turned to see a rider approaching James Lawson, his expression grim. "Jack," he called, "trouble at the north pasture. Rustlers hit the Taylor place last night, might be heading our way, need all hands." Jack released Eliza's hand, his face hardening into lines of concern. "I'll be right there." He turned back to her. "Lock your doors tonight, keep your father's revolver close." "I will," she promised. "Be careful." He hesitated, then reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "I'll come back before we leave for the cattle drive. Make sure you have everything you need." Then he was gone, mounting his horse and galloping after his brother, leaving Eliza with the ghost of his touch on her cheek and the echo of words he hadn't quite spoken. That night, alone in the cabin for the first time, Eliza found it difficult to sleep. Every creak of the settling logs, every whisper of wind against the newly repaired windows, kept her alert and wary. The revolver lay on the table beside her bed, loaded and ready, though she prayed she wouldn't need it. Dawn brought no sign of rustlers or other trouble, but neither did it bring Jack. Pushing aside her disappointment, Eliza threw herself into work mucking out the horse stalls, checking the mares for any signs of distress in their new environment, and organizing the cabin's interior. Physical labor helped quiet her mind and exhaust her body, ensuring she would sleep despite her worries. 3 days passed with no word from the Lawson ranch. On the 4th morning, as Eliza was feeding the horses, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped, thinking Jack had returned, but it was Emma who appeared at the edge of the property, riding a sturdy pony. "Emma," Eliza called, hurrying to meet her. "Is everything all right? The rustlers caught and bound for the territorial prison," Emma assured her, dismounting. "But not before they led our men on a 3-day chase. The Taylor family lost nearly half their herd. And Jack, James, they're unharmed." Emma's eyes softened at the anxiety in Eliza's voice. "Both fine, though exhausted. They returned late last night, barely able to stay in their saddles." She patted Eliza's arm reassuringly. "Jack asked me to check on you, said he'd come himself as soon as he'd had some rest." Relief washed through Eliza, followed by a wave of self-consciousness at how transparent her feelings must be. "I'm glad they're safe. Please tell them I'm managing well here." Emma smiled knowingly. "I will. Now, show me what you've done with the cabin. I'm dying to see your progress." The women spent the day together, Emma offering advice on winter preparations and sharing stories of her early days at the Double L. When she departed in late afternoon, Eliza felt less isolated, bolstered by the growing sense of community she was finding in this wild territory. The following day brought Jack, as promised. Eliza spotted him riding across the meadow and had to restrain herself from running to meet him, settling instead for a dignified walk to the edge of the yard. "You're looking well," he said as he dismounted, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident approval. She wore one of Emma's hand-me-down skirts and a practical blouse, her hair braided and pinned up to keep it out of her way while working. "The frontier agrees with you." "It's beginning to," she agreed. "Emma told me about the rustlers. I'm glad you're safe." "It was a near thing," he admitted. "They were desperate men, dangerous." His expression grew serious. "Which is why I'm relieved to find you unharmed. I worried about leaving you alone. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. The horses are settling in well, and I've made good progress organizing the cabin." He nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. "We leave for the cattle drive tomorrow at dawn, 3 weeks minimum before we return." "I understand," Eliza said, striving for a lightness she didn't feel. "You have responsibilities to your family's ranch." "Yes," but Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of inner conflict. "I don't like the idea of you here alone with winter coming on. The cabin's secure, but there are 100 things that could go wrong, and the nearest help is miles away." "What would you have me do?" Eliza asked. "Abandon the homestead after all the work we've put into it." "No, of course not. He broke off, frustrated. "Emma suggested you might stay at the Double L while we're gone. Sarah would love the company and you'd be safer there." Eliza considered the offer. It was sensible, practical even. But something in her rebelled at the thought of retreating from the home she was building, the independence she was claiming. "Thank you, but no," she said firmly. "This is my land, my responsibility. I came west to stand on my own 2 feet, not to be sheltered at the first sign of difficulty." Jack's expression softened. "I know, and I admire your determination, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered, Eliza. It doesn't make you any less independent." She sighed, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "Perhaps not, but I need to do this, Jack. I need to know that I can." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, but promise me you'll go to the Double L if there's any trouble at all." "I promise," she said, touched by his concern. They spent the remainder of the day checking the cabin and outbuildings one final time, ensuring everything was as secure as possible for the coming weeks. Jack chopped extra firewood, stacking it neatly on the porch where it would stay dry, while Eliza prepared a simple meal from her limited stores. As twilight approached, an awkward tension grew between them. Both knew he should start back to the Double L to prepare for the early departure, yet neither seemed willing to be the first to say goodbye. Finally, as the sun dipped below the western ridge, Jack gathered his hat and gloves. "I should go. Dawn comes early, and James will have my hide if I'm not ready to ride." Eliza walked with him to where his horse waited, her heart heavy with words unsaid. "Thank you for everything, Jack. I don't know how I would have managed without your help." He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the fading light. "You would have found a way. You're stronger than you know, Eliza Keller. The compliment warmed her, but it couldn't dispel the chill of their impending separation. "Be careful on the drive." "I've heard the trail to Miles City can be treacherous." "I've made the journey a dozen times," he assured her. "We'll be back before the first heavy snow." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. The simple contact sent warmth spiraling through her, and she found herself stepping closer, drawn by something beyond her conscious control. Jack's free hand came up to touch her cheek, his palm rough against her skin. "Eliza," he murmured, his voice deeper than she'd ever heard it. She looked up into his eyes, finding there a reflection of her own longing. Time seemed to suspend as he leaned down, his breath warm against her lips. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Eliza answered by sliding her hand to his shoulder, drawing him closer. The world narrowed to the point where they connected, the soft press of his mouth against hers, the solid warmth of his body, the faint scent of pine and leather that she'd come to associate with him. It was everything she'd secretly hoped for and nothing she'd dared expect. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I've wanted to do that since I found you by that broken wagon," he confessed. A smile bloomed on Eliza's lips. "I've wanted you to since you fixed my wheel and held my hand." He laughed softly, the sound wrapping around her like a caress. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "As soon as I can, I'll be here," she replied simply. With visible reluctance, Jack mounted his horse. 3 weeks, he said. "Less if we make good time." "I'll count the days," Eliza promised, stepping back to allow him room to turn. She watched until horse and rider disappeared into the gathering darkness, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. 3 weeks suddenly seemed an eternity, but she would endure it. After all, she'd crossed a continent to start anew. She could certainly manage a few weeks of solitude. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of work and waiting. Eliza cared for the horses, continued organizing the cabin, and started planning improvements for spring. Emma visited twice, bringing fresh bread and news of Butt, staying long enough each time to help with heavier tasks before returning to the Double L. The Dawson family, sturdy homesteaders from the next valley, stopped by as well, curious about their new neighbor. Though initially reserved, they warmed to Eliza when she demonstrated her knowledge of horses and willingness to work. By the end of their visit, arrangements had been made to share grazing rights and assist each other with larger projects. 2 weeks after Jack's departure, the first substantial snowfall blanketed the valley. Eliza woke to a transformed world, drifts of white covering the meadow, ice crystals hanging from the eaves, and a profound silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The beauty of it caught her breath, even as the reality of winter's arrival sharpened her awareness of her isolation. She spent that day ensuring the horses had adequate shelter in the barn, checking her food stores and banking the fire to maintain warmth in the cabin. As darkness fell early, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching snow continue to fall and wondering where Jack was, if he was safe, and when he would return. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the valley. Paths to the barn had to be shoveled twice daily, and keeping firewood stacked and dry became a constant concern. Eliza found muscles she didn't know she possessed aching from the unaccustomed labor, but she persevered, determined to prove to herself as much as to Jack that she could manage on her own. On the 18th day after his departure, with the cattle drive now overdue, a second storm swept in from the north. This one brought not just snow but biting wind that found every crack in the cabin's walls, despite their repairs. Eliza huddled near the stove, wrapped in every blanket she possessed, listening to the wind howl like a living thing around the eaves. By morning, the storm had passed, but temperatures had plummeted. When Eliza ventured out to check on the horses, her breath crystallized instantly and the snow squeaked beneath her boots. The animals were restless in their stalls, sensing the change in weather and perhaps picking up on her own unease. "Just a cold snap," she assured them as she distributed feed. "It will pass." But as she trudged back to the cabin, her gaze fixed on the northern horizon, she couldn't help wondering if the cattle drive had encountered the same deadly cold and what that might mean for those caught in the open. 4 more days passed with no word. Eliza tried to keep busy, to push away the creeping fear that something had gone terribly wrong. She was in the barn, brushing the bay mare, when she heard the distant jingle of harness bells. Heart pounding, she rushed to the barn door, hoping to see Jack. Instead, it was James Lawson who appeared at the edge of the property, driving a wagon through the snow. Beside him sat Emma, bundled in heavy furs, Eliza's stomach twisted with dread as she hurried to meet them. "James, Emma, is there news?" James's face was grim beneath his frost-rimmed beard. The drive hit bad weather north of the Yellowstone. Half the men turned back with what cattle they could save, the rest pushed on. "And Jack," Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "stayed with the forward group," James confirmed. Last word was 4 days ago when the men who turned back split off. They were heading into the teeth of that second storm. Emma reached out to clasp Eliza's gloved hand. "They're experienced drovers, Eliza. Jack knows that trail better than most. If anyone can bring them through safely, he can." Eliza nodded, clinging to that slender hope. "Why have you come? Surely not just to bring this news." "The weather's turning again," James explained. "Could be the worst storm of the season coming in. Emma and I both think you should return to the Double L with us, at least until it passes." Part of Eliza wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence even in the face of danger. But the practical part of her, the part that had survived the journey west, recognized the wisdom in their concern. "The horses," she began. "We'll bring them too," James assured her. "Got room in our barn, and they'll be safer there if this storm is as bad as they're saying." Decision made, Eliza quickly gathered essential belongings and helped secure the cabin against her absence. The horses were hitched to James's wagon, and by mid-afternoon they were on their way to the Double L, leaving Silver Creek blanketed in snow and silence. The storm struck that night with a fury that validated James's concerns. For 3 days, snow fell so heavily that the world beyond the windows of the Lawson home disappeared, replaced by a swirling white void. Winds shrieked around the corners of the house, rattling shutters and finding tiny gaps that let in drafts of frigid air. Even inside, huddled near the large fireplace, they could feel winter's bite. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, revealing a landscape transformed. Snowdrifts reached the eaves of the barn, and paths had to be dug rather than shoveled to reach the animals. The temperature remained bitterly cold, making outdoor work dangerous without proper protection. A week passed with no word from the cattle drive. Then, too, Christmas approached, bringing with it a strained attempt at festivity for the sake of the children. Eliza helped Emma prepare traditional foods and assisted Sarah and William in decorating the house with pine boughs and ribbons, but her heart wasn't in the celebrations. Each day that passed without news dimmed her hope a little more. On Christmas Eve, as the family gathered around the fireplace to exchange simple gifts, the sound of horses approaching broke the evening quiet. James went to the window, peering out into the darkness. "Riders," he announced, reaching for his coat. 3, maybe 4. Eliza's heart leapt to her throat. She followed James onto the porch, unmindful of the cold, straining to see through the gloom. Lantern lights spilled across the yard, illuminating a small group of men on exhausted horses. At their head rode a figure she would have recognized anywhere, despite the heavy coat and frost-covered hat. "Jack," she breathed, his name a prayer on her lips. He dismounted stiffly, moving with the careful deliberation of a man pushed beyond endurance. His face, when he turned toward the light, was gaunt beneath a growth of beard, his eyes sunken with fatigue. But when he saw her standing on the porch, those eyes lit with a warmth that defied the winter chill. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough from disuse or emotion, perhaps both. "You're here." She was moving before she realized it, hurrying down the steps and across the yard. Jack met her halfway, enfolding her in arms that trembled slightly with exhaustion but held her as if he'd never let go. "I thought," she began, her voice breaking. "I know," he murmured into her hair. I'm sorry. The storm caught us in open country, lost half the herd, nearly lost ourselves. Took shelter in an abandoned mining camp for 10 days before we could push on. James approached, clapping his brother on the shoulder. Glad you made it home, Jack. Was beginning to think I'd have to come looking for you. Nearly sent the others ahead, Jack admitted, but didn't want to split the group with conditions so bad. He glanced at the men still mounted behind him. They need food, warmth, rest. Of course, Emma said, having joined them in the yard. Come inside, all of you. There's stew keeping warm and beds ready. The next hours were a blur of activity settling the exhausted drovers, tending to frostbitten fingers and toes, hearing fragments of their harrowing journey. Through it all, Eliza stayed close to Jack, as if afraid he might disappear if she looked away. He, in turn, seemed reluctant to let her out of his sight, his eyes finding her across the room whenever they were separated. It was well past midnight when the household finally settled. The drovers were asleep in the bunkhouse. James and Emma had retired to their room, and the children were long since in bed. Only Jack and Eliza remained awake, sitting before the dying fire in the main room. I should let you rest, Eliza said, noting the fatigue etched in his face. You've been through so much. Jack reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Not yet. I've been holding on to this moment for weeks, sitting with you, safe and warm, knowing we both made it through. She squeezed his hand. I was so afraid, Jack. When the storm hit and then another with no word, I know. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I thought of you every day, wondered if you were safe, if you'd gone to the Double L as we discussed. A smile touched his lips. Should have known you'd hold out until James and Emma came for you. I would have stayed at Silver Creek if not for the horses, Eliza admitted. I was determined to prove I could manage on my own. You have nothing to prove, Eliza, not to me, not to anyone. Jack's gaze was steady, his voice quiet but firm. What you've accomplished since arriving here would humble most men I know. Warmth bloomed in her chest at his words. Thank you. That means more than you know. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire. Jack's thumb continued its gentle movement against her palm, each stroke sending tendrils of awareness through her body. I had a lot of time to think, he finally said, during those days trapped by the storm, about what matters, what I want for my future. Eliza's breath caught at the intent in his eyes. And what did you decide? That life's too precious and too uncertain to waste time dancing around what we truly want. He shifted, turning to face her fully. I want you, Eliza Keller, your strength, your determination, your gentle heart. I want to build something lasting with you, whether at Silver Creek or elsewhere. Joy surged through her, bright and fierce. I want that too, Jack, more than I can say. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. I'm not a wealthy man. The war took my youth, and the years after took my peace. I've only recently found my way back to solid ground, but I can offer you my heart, my hands, and every tomorrow I have left. Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. That's all I could ever ask for, all I've ever wanted. Jack released her hand to cup her face between his palms. Then marry me, Eliza. Let's face whatever comes together. Yes, she whispered, no hesitation in her voice. Yes, I'll marry you, Jackson Lawson. His smile was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. He drew her close, his kiss a seal on their promise deeper, more certain than the one they'd shared before his departure. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Merry Christmas, Eliza. Merry Christmas, Jack. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the Montana territory, snow melting to reveal the first tentative green shoots of spring. Eliza and Jack were married in the Butt Church in late February, with the Lawson family, the Dawsons, and half the town in attendance. Clara from the general store organized a reception that became the social event of the season, complete with music, dancing, and enough food to feed a cattle drive. The newlyweds settled at Silver Creek, combining Jack's savings with Eliza's determination to expand the homestead. The horse breeding operation grew steadily, with the first foals arriving in April, strong, healthy additions that promised a successful future. Jack's expertise with cattle complemented Eliza's knowledge of horses. allowing them to diversify their livestock and increase their security against the vagaries of frontier economics. By summer, the cabin had been expanded to include a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. A wide porch wrapped around two sides, providing a place to sit in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. Eliza's garden flourished, yielding vegetables for their table and extra to trade in town. Word of the quality of their horses spread, bringing buyers from as far as Cheyenne and Denver. The army contracted for a dozen mounts annually, and stage companies sought their stock for teams. What had begun as a desperate gamble was becoming a thriving enterprise. Life wasn't without challenges. Summer storms damaged the barn roof, requiring extensive repairs. A mountain lion took two foals before Jack and James tracked and eliminated the threat. The unpredictable weather of the northern plains continued to test their resilience and resourcefulness. But through it all, they faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. On their first anniversary, Jack surprised Eliza with a rocking chair for the porch, handcrafted from local pine. "For watching our empire grow," he teased as he set it in place. Eliza laughed, settling into the chair. "Is that what we're building? An empire of sorts?" Jack leaned against the porch rail, his face softer than she'd ever seen it. "A place that's ours, where we can welcome family, raise children, grow old together." "Children," Eliza echoed, a smile playing at her lips. "How many were you thinking?" "Two, maybe three," he replied, then noted her expression. "Why, what are you thinking?" She reached for his hand, guiding it to rest against her still flat stomach. "I'm thinking we might start with one around next summer." Jack's eyes widened, his hand pressing gently against her middle as if he might feel the tiny life growing there. "You're certain?" "As certain as one can be," she confirmed. "Emma suspects we'll have a June baby." The joy that transformed his face was something Eliza knew she would remember for the rest of her days. Jack dropped to his knees before the rocking chair, gathering her in his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "A baby," he whispered against her neck. "Our baby." "The start of our empire," she teased, running her fingers through his hair. He looked up at her, eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you, Eliza Lawson, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Jackson Lawson, my rescuer, my partner, my heart." As the sun set over Silver Creek Valley, painting their home in the golden light of early autumn, Jack and Eliza remained on the porch, rocking gently in the chair he had made, talking of the future they would build together, a future that had begun the day a cowboy found her by a broken wagon, fixed the wheel, and held her hand. 5 years later, Silver Creek Ranch was nearly unrecognizable from the abandoned homestead Eliza had first claimed. The original cabin now expanded into a proper home with multiple bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a stone fireplace large enough to warm the entire main room stood at the center of a thriving operation. A new barn housed their prized breeding stock, while corrals and pastures contained dozens of horses in various stages of training. Jack and Eliza had established one of the territory's most respected horse breeding programs, specializing in sturdy, intelligent mounts suited to the demanding conditions of frontier life. Their reputation had spread beyond Montana, bringing buyers from territories and states throughout the West. The family had grown as well. 4-year-old Thomas James Lawson, named for both Jack's mentor from Colorado and his uncle, was a miniature version of his father, blue-eyed, sturdy, and fearless. 2-year-old Catherine Emma, called Katie, had her mother's copper hair and determined spirit. And just 3 months earlier, twins Michael and Abigail had joined the family, bringing equal measures of joy and exhaustion to their parents. On a warm June morning, Eliza stood on the porch, rocking Abigail while watching Jack teach Thomas to brush one of the gentler mares. Katie sat nearby, solemnly handing her brother brushes and picking up those he dropped. Michael slept peacefully in a cradle just inside the open front door, where Eliza could hear him if he woke. The scene before her, her family, their home, the thriving ranch, sometimes still seemed like a dream, especially when she remembered that frightening day by the broken wagon. How close she had come to a very different fate, how many things could have gone wrong. If Jack hadn't appeared when he did, if he hadn't been the man he was. "Mama, look," Thomas called, drawing her from her reverie. "I'm doing it right. Wonderful, sweetheart," she called back. "Your father's an excellent teacher." Jack glanced up, catching her eye over their son's head. The love in his gaze, undimmed by years of marriage and the challenges of building their life together, still had the power to make her heart skip. "He's a natural," Jack said proudly. "Gets it from his mother." Eliza smiled, shifting Abigail to her other shoulder. "Flatterer." "Just stating facts, Mrs. Lawson." His grin was boyish, despite the silver beginning to thread through his hair at the temples. "This young man's going to be running the place before we know it." "Me too," Katie insisted, not to be outdone by her brother. "I help too." "Of course you do, Princess," Jack assured her. "You'll be the boss of all of us someday." Eliza laughed at their daughter's satisfied nod. Katie had been declaring her intention to run the ranch since she could form sentences, and neither parent saw any reason to discourage her determination. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. James and Emma were visible on the road that wound through the valley, their own children now 3 in number visible beside them. "Uncle James," Thomas shouted, abandoning his brushing lesson to run toward the gate. Katie followed, her shorter legs working double time to keep up with her brother. Jack caught them both before they could reach the road. "Whoa there, partners. Wait till they stop before you go greeting them." Eliza came down from the porch, Abigail still in her arms. "I didn't expect them until tomorrow. I hope nothing's wrong." "Probably just eager to see these little ones," Jack said, nodding toward the baby. "Emma's been hinting about wanting to hold the twins every time I see her in town." The Lawson families had remained close, with James and Emma's children growing up alongside their cousins. The two ranches, the Double L and Silver Creek, often shared resources, helping each other with cattle drives, horse training, and the myriad tasks of frontier life. As the wagon drew closer, Eliza could see Emma's smile and James's wave. Their oldest, 12-year-old Robert, drove the team while his parents managed the younger children. It was a scene of domestic harmony that would have seemed impossible to the uncertain young woman who had first arrived in Montana territory. "Eliza," Emma called as the wagon stopped. "We couldn't wait another day to see those babies." She climbed down, already reaching for Abigail. "Oh, look at her, she's grown so much already." James followed more sedately, clapping Jack on the shoulder in greeting. "Hope we're not intruding." Emma was determined we come today instead of tomorrow. "You're always welcome," Eliza assured him, accepting a kiss on the cheek from her brother-in-law. "We were just finishing morning chores." The children swarmed around each other, cousins exchanging news and planning adventures with the serious intensity of youth. Thomas immediately began showing Robert the new foal born just days earlier, while Katie attached herself to 8-year-old Sarah with worshipful eyes. "Let's get everyone inside," Jack suggested. "Eliza made fresh bread this morning, and there's coffee ready." The extended family settled around the large table that dominated the kitchen. Babies passed from arms to arms, children running in and out with the boundless energy of youth. Conversation flowed easily, covering everything from cattle prices to the new schoolteacher in Butt. "Oh, before I forget," Emma said as she cradled Michael, "Clara at the general store asked me to tell you that the fabric you ordered has arrived. She's holding it for you." "Wonderful," Eliza replied. "I've been waiting to make new curtains for the twins' room." "Speaking of the general store," James added, "there's talk of a railway spur coming to but next year. The mining companies are pushing for it and the town council's backing the idea." Jack whistled softly. "That would change everything. Faster shipping, more supplies, better prices for our stock. And more people," James noted. "Territories growing fast, won't be long before we're looking at statehood." "Progress," Emma murmured, not entirely approving. "Sometimes I miss the quiet of the early days." Eliza understood the sentiment. While the conveniences of civilization were welcome, there was something special about the untamed quality of the land they had first settled. "We'll adapt," she said. "We always do." As the men moved outside to discuss a new breeding program Jack was considering, and the older children disappeared to explore the creek that gave the ranch its name, Eliza and Emma remained at the table with the babies, enjoying a moment of quiet companionship. "You seem happy," Emma observed, gently rocking Michael. Despite the chaos of four little ones so close together, Eliza smiled, watching Abigail sleep peacefully in her cradle. "I am, tired beyond reason some days, but happy in a way I never imagined possible. When James first brought you to the Double L, that young woman with her broken wagon and determined chin, I knew you'd either flourish here or flee back east within a month." Emma's eyes twinkled. "I'm glad it was the former." "As am I," Eliza said softly. "Though there were moments during that first winter when I questioned my sanity." "And Jack," Emma asked, her tone casual but her gaze knowing, "any regrets there?" Eliza glanced out the window, where her husband stood deep in conversation with his brother, gesturing toward the distant pasture where their best brood mares grazed. The years had been kind to him, adding character to his face rather than diminishing his vitality. He was still the man who had rescued her, still capable and strong, but the restlessness that had driven him to wander had been replaced by a steady purpose. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "He's everything I didn't know I needed." Emma nodded, satisfied. "That's love, true and lasting. Not the fleeting excitement of romance novels, but something that grows stronger through hardship and joy alike." The men returned, bringing with them the scent of sunshine and horses. Jack crossed to where Eliza sat, dropping a kiss on the top of her head before checking on the twins. "James thinks we should expand the northern pasture," he told her. "Says the grass there is perfect for young stock. If you think it's best," she agreed. "We'll need more grazing land if we continue to increase the herd. We'll discuss the details later." His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, the simple touch conveying affection and partnership. "For now, let's enjoy our family." The day passed in pleasant companionship, with a shared meal at midday and promises to gather again soon. As the sun began its westward descent, James and Emma packed their wagon for the journey home, children reluctantly saying goodbye to cousins and horses alike. "Same time next month at our place," Emma suggested as she hugged Eliza goodbye. "We'll be there," Eliza promised. "Hopefully with more sleep under our belts by then." The family stood on the porch, waving until the wagon disappeared around the bend in the road. Thomas immediately began pleading to help with evening chores, while Katie, overtired from the excitement, leaned against Jack's leg with drooping eyelids. "I'll put this one down for a nap," Jack said, lifting Katie into his arms, "then help Thomas with the horses." "And I'll feed the twins," Eliza said, hearing the first stirrings of hunger from the cradle inside. "Then start supper." The familiar rhythm of their life resumed. Children tended, animals fed, the countless tasks of running a home and ranch addressed with practiced efficiency. By the time darkness fell, the younger children were asleep, and Thomas was nodding over the book Jack was reading to him. After settling their eldest son in his bed, Jack and Eliza retreated to the porch, claiming a few moments of quiet together before sleep claimed them as well. They sat side by side in the double rocking chair Jack had crafted for their third anniversary, watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky. "Happy?" Jack asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. "Completely," Eliza replied, leaning into his embrace. "You, more than I ever thought possible." His voice held a note of wonder, even after all these years. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I was that day finding you by that broken wagon, holding your hand." "I was the lucky one," she countered, "a woman alone in the wilderness with bandits circling and night approaching." She turned her face up to his. "You saved me, Jack." He shook his head, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. "No, Eliza, you saved me. I was just drifting, trying to outrun memories that wouldn't let go. You gave me a reason to stop running, to build something lasting." She smiled, settling back against his chest. "Then I suppose we saved each other." "I suppose we did," he agreed, his voice rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, surrounded by the night sounds of their ranch horses nickering in the distant pasture, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the occasional call of a night bird. This land that had once seemed so foreign, so daunting, had become home in every sense of the word. Inside the house, one of the twins began to cry. Jack and Eliza exchanged rueful smiles, the moment of peace broken but not diminished. "Sounds like Michael," Jack said, rising and offering his hand. "He has his mother's sense of timing." Eliza accepted his assistance, her fingers intertwining with his as they had that first day by the wagon, and his father's lungs. Hand in hand, they went to tend their child, moving together with the easy synchronicity of long partnership. The future stretched before them, challenging at times, certainly, but faced together, with love as their foundation and the home they had built as their sanctuary. Silver Creek Ranch continued to flourish through the years, weathering economic downturns, harsh winters, and the inevitable changes that came with Montana's growth. But expanded with the mining boom, and the railroad arrived as predicted, bringing new opportunities and challenges. The territory achieved statehood in 1889, an event the Lawson family celebrated with neighbors and friends at a grand picnic by the creek. Thomas, as expected, grew into his father's legacy, adding innovative breeding techniques to traditional knowledge. Katie, true to her early declarations, developed a head for business that complemented her brother's skills with horses. The twins, Michael and Abigail, found their own paths, Michael drawn to veterinary medicine, Abigail to teaching, but both remained connected to the land that had nurtured them. Through it all, Jack and Eliza remained the heart of Silver Creek, their partnership deepening with each passing season. The love that had begun with a chance encounter by a broken wagon had built a legacy that would endure for generations to come, a testament to courage, perseverance, and the enduring power of hands joined in common purpose. And on quiet evenings, even decades later, they could still be found on their porch, rocking gently, hands clasped between them, watching the sun set over the valley they had made their own.